Hello, my name is Austin Habish, the founder of Think Catholic, and you're listening to the Summa podcast, where we study St. Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologiae in a way simple and insightful for anyone to understand. The Summa podcast is brought to you by Think Catholic. Taking 2 questions of the Summa a day, we'll seek to summarize St. Thomas's responses, discovering the brilliance of Aquinas. And his Catholic faith is day 192. So let's get started. We're covering today questions 148 and 149 of the Secunda Secundae, that is of gluttony and of sobriety. The translation that I always use in these podcasts is the one generously provided to me by Ave Maria Press, the 5-volume set translated by the Fathers of the English Dominican province, which you can now get at a discounted price from Ave Maria Press's site by typing in the code SUMMA10. And so here we go. Article 1, whether gluttony is a sin. St. Gregory wrote that unless we first tame the enemy dwelling within us, namely our gluttonous appetite, we have not even stood up to engage in spiritual combat. A gluttonous appetite is sinful insofar as it is at variance with reason. To the degree it falls short of the right rule of reason, it is wrong, and therefore gluttony, as the disordered desire for food and drink, is sinful. Article 2, whether gluttony is a mortal sin. If the vice of gluttony turns a man towards a means, when it comes to food and drink, which is merely disproportionate to his end, for example, like a man who has the virtue of charity, in some instance eating more than he realized he should have, but was overcome by passion in that moment, his actions weren't necessarily aimed against love of God and neighbor. They just missed in some slight way the correct means to his true end. But if the vice of gluttony turn a man towards a mean incompatible with his true end, such as eating meat on Good Friday, for example, and without some legitimate excuse for doing so, then this act of gluttony will be mortally sinful. Also, and it goes without saying, the man who, however aware of it he is, places the goal of his life in the pleasures of the table, this also would be sinning mortally. Lastly, citing a great quote within this article, which is worth mentioning because it repeats again for us that connection between gluttony and lust. St. Gregory taught, when the belly is distended by gluttony, the virtues of the soul are destroyed by lust. Article 3, whether gluttony is the greatest of sins. And there is really no chance of that, since the sins directed directly against God, like blasphemy or idolatry, are much worse than the vicious habit of eating or drinking too much. Thus, from the perspective of the object of the sin, and then even the culpability of the agent, since the right rule with food and drink is often very difficult to discover, gluttony is certainly not the greatest of sins. Lastly, when it comes to the sins which gluttony causes, such as those pertaining to lust, even here gluttony cannot be the greatest of sins, but it is more grievous on account of these other sins to which it leads one to. Article 4, whether the species of gluttony are fittingly distinguished. In brief, which we can then explain, Aquinas writes, Gregory says the vice of gluttony tempts us in 5 ways. Sometimes it forestalls the hour of need. Sometimes it seeks costly meats. Sometimes it requires the food to be daintily cooked. Sometimes it exceeds the measure of refreshment by taking too much. Sometimes we sin by the very heat of an immoderate appetite, which are contained in the following words, hastily, sumptuously, too much daintily, and greedily. These are the kinds of gluttony that are divided into vices attendant upon the activity of eating, which includes hastily and greedily. Then the other kind of gluttonous vices are those attendant upon the object of eating, which is either too much or too costly or too delicately prepared. All of these, if they go beyond the rule of reason, if the appetite transgresses the rule of reason, will be unique species of gluttony and bring about sins corresponding to them. Article 5, whether gluttony is a capital vice. Capital vice denotes a vice from which, as having a most desirable end, other vices originate. That's Aquinas' words. And because the pleasures of food and drink are quite enticing, therefore easily do other vices spring up around them. Gluttony is a capital vice because the pleasure attendant upon touch, and here in particular taste, can easily appear as a counterfeit beatitude. Instead of the beatitude and pleasure our heart is ultimately made for, which is that which comes from the vision of God. Therefore, because of the power of the pull of the pleasures of the table, which calls forth other vices in its wake, or for its sake, gluttony is numbered among the capital vices. Article 6, whether 6 daughters are fittingly assigned to gluttony. And it looks like from the article there are 5 daughter sins, 4 relating to the soul and 1 to the body. The daughter sin relating to the body is uncleanliness, which stems from what we've said about the connection between gluttony and lust, that overeating can then cause the uncleanliness of nocturnal seminal emissions. Then when it comes to the soul, overeating affects dullness of mind, by burdening the body, can also cause unseemly joy or a riotous, random joy. That's what Aquinas says here, because one's appetite is disordered by gluttony. Also, through the vice of gluttony, one may be given to intemperate speech and action, which is called loquaciousness when it comes to speech. And indeed, in acting without due gravity, we have what is called the vice of scurrility, which gives us then the following daughter vices connected to gluttony: dullness of mind, unseemly joy, loquaciousness, scurrility, and uncleanliness. And moving on then to question 149 on sobriety. Article 1, whether drink is the matter of sobriety. Sobriety could be said to be a virtue pertaining to drink in general, but it is about, most of all, that kind of drink which is most volatile, dangerous to man, and therefore needs a virtue to keep it in check, and that is alcoholic drink. Even Scripture bears witness to the danger of intoxicating drink, as the book of Sirach taught. Sober drinking is health to soul and body. Wine drunken with excess raiseth quarrels and wrath and many ruins. Thus, in response to our article, St. Thomas writes, sobriety is especially concerned with drink, not any kind of drink, but that which by reason of its volatility is liable to disturb the brain, such as wine and all intoxicants. Article 2, whether sobriety is by itself a special virtue. St. Thomas answers this article briefly, so simply quoting him, he writes, it belongs to moral virtue to safeguard the good of reason against those things which may hinder it. Hence, wherever we find a special hindrance to reason, there must needs be a special virtue to remove it. Now, intoxicating drink is a special kind of hindrance to the use of reason. Wherefore, in order to remove this hindrance to reason, a special virtue, which is sobriety, is requisite. Article 3, whether the use of wine is altogether unlawful. Wine is not an evil in itself, for St. Paul advised Timothy, do not still drink water, but use a little wine for thy stomach's sake and thy frequent infirmities. And as Jesus Christ taught, hear and understand, not what goes into the mouth defiles a man, but what comes out of the mouth, this defiles a man. Wine is unlawful for the man who cannot use it blamelessly. But if the use of wine in some particular circumstance is not contrary to reason, then it will be for this same reason not contrary to God or sinful. Article 4 in our last article, whether sobriety is more requisite in persons of greater standing, which Aquinas also answers very briefly, so allowing him the last word in our episode. He teaches, sobriety is more requisite in certain persons as being more necessary for the operations proper to them. Now, a moderate use of wine is a notable obstacle to the use of reason, wherefore sobriety is specially prescribed in whom reason should be vigorous in instructing others, to bishops and all ministers of the church, who should fulfill their spiritual duties with a devout mind, and to kings, who should rule their subjects with wisdom. And with that, we finish another episode. We have just finished covering questions 148 and 149 of the Secunda Secundae, that is, of gluttony and of sobriety. My name is Austin Habish with Think Catholic, and I cannot wait to see you tomorrow.